Good afternoon. Welcome back to our debate. Now I'm so pleased to call to this stage our next guest. Gustavo Carona is a humanitarian doctor with more than 13 missions for Doctors Without Borders, bringing a first-hand reality check about what needs to be done to create a more dignifying planet for all. I'm so proud to receive him since the last time we were together. The world changed, and I believe Gustavo changed as well. He wrote a book called 1001 Letters to Mosul, and now has a new book that I really I recommend. It is called The World Needs to Know, where Gustavo tells us in a hard and emotional way the day-to-day reality of some of the great disasters he has experienced. Please welcome Gustavo Carona. Hi, Gustavo.
Thank you
Welcome.
very much, Fernanda. It's a pleasure. Boa tarde a todos.
The stage is yours.
I don't know much about the planet, and I'm not a scientist, but considering that everybody's speaking about medicine right now, including Donald Trump, I think I'm brave enough to share some thoughts. I would like to ask you a very basic question. I think it's basic. Like, how many of you think that smoking is harmful? Can you raise your hands, please? I think pretty much everybody. Now, please imagine that you are with me in Syria, in the middle of the war. It's winter, it's very cold, it has been raining and snowing most of the days, and all of a sudden it comes like a very sunny day, and on my way to the hospital, I tell the Syrian driver that is with me, like, what a beautiful day. And he replies right back to me, no, it's not, they will fly. And so it was. The scariest thing you can imagine. Airplanes and helicopters over your head without knowing in which moment they will press the red button. And so it was. This huge blast, this loud noise, the ground shaking, and by the intensity of the sound, you could tell more or less how long we would have to be prepared in our hospital, in our emergency room, to be completely full of injured. And so it was. A lot of people, dozens of bodies full of dust, full of blood, screaming, men with machine guns, while we were trying to do our job and having to make very hard decisions about who to save and who we should let die right in that moment because we cannot save them all. And meanwhile, if you don't understand what I'm trying to say to you about my experience in Syria for a couple of months and what has been the life for Syrians for the last 10 years. Maybe if you saw the documentaries of The Cave and For Sama, maybe you have an idea. But not only the brutalities of the war, they were facing the horrible pressure, the enormous terror of the Islamic State, when most of them were just trying to fight for freedom and democracy. And what alternatives do they have? To run? To escape? Maybe they will die in the Mediterranean. Maybe they will be treated as human garbage in refugee camps, as we all see in the news. That's their alternatives. So now if I tell you that most of the men that I met in Syria smoked a lot, would you be able to tell them that smoking is harmful? But are there two medicines? Are there two sciences? Are there two different ways of looking at lung cancer, pulmonary disease, or tobacco as a risk factor for cardiovascular diseases? No, it's just a matter of very different perspectives. The perceptions of the risks, of the options, of the expectations are so different. But then you tell me, okay, but that is very extreme, this is just war. No, but there are too many people who have different expectations. There is 25% of the world population that has no access to essential medicines. And there is 50% of the world population that has no access to essential health services. So it puts your life into a different perspective. Because we were programmed to live until our 80s or plus. We take this for granted. And if something shakes this comfort zone, we think it's a catastrophe. But there are just too many people living with different expectations. And if you want to think about climate change, most of all, it's a projection of our future. But too many of us have no future. There is a huge part of the population that has no future. And we cannot divide this problem, we cannot divide the planet in between the ones that have future and the ones that don't have future. It's human nature. First you have to feel safe, and then you think about tomorrow. And most of us think that the fight for the planet is very altruistic. Well, honestly, I don't agree. I think it's purely selfish. It's just common sense. It's us thinking about us, our future, and the future of our kids. Altruism is when we have the capacity to think about the kids of the others, because they have the same value. But it's kind of ironic, but out of our selfishness, we will have to be altruistic to save the planet. Because this is a global problem created by all of us, created by men. And the only path towards a solution is if we understand the globality of our humanity. It looks like it's something very simple, but maybe this is breaking news, groundbreaking, maybe you never heard this before, but the oceans and the atmosphere have no borders. They don't respect the lines drawn by men. So if most of us that believe in science and accept it as close as we can be to the truth, look at this as a matter of urgency, I look at it not only with urgency, but also as a matter of opportunity to deepen our thoughts into a higher truth. It's pointless, it's worthless, it will not work to think about the planet if we don't think about the people. Last year, I was in Yemen. And after 10 missions in war zones, I thought it was difficult to be surprised. But I was wrong. I mean, in between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, Yemen is a beautiful mixture of desert, mountains, and crystalline waters. Sana'a, its capital, it's famous for the skyscrapers that have more than 2,000 years old. It's part of the heritage of UNESCO. They call it the Manhattan of the desert. And understanding Yemen's culture, it's a travel in time, beyond times. It's one of the oldest civilizations on Earth. And this should be the perception that we should have of these people and their beautiful country. But there is one reality that erases all other identities: war. War transforms culture into despise, it transforms idyllic landscapes into prejudice, and it transforms people into statistics. I will share with you my very first three initial memories, first three impacts that I had when I arrived in Yemen that pretty much summarize everything. When I arrived in Aden, it's a very beautiful city on the coast, in the south coast. It looks like Rio de Janeiro of the Arabian. It's mountains and bays. And I went straight to the hospital of Doctors Without Borders by car. And when I'm entering the hospital, I just see an ambulance, and in it, there is a man shot in the back. He's dead, but they just unload him like a piece of meat. And during my mission, I was struggling exactly with the same dilemma. How can I see the difference between humans and pieces of meat? When the emergency room was being flooded with injured from the permanent bombings of the front lines, of dusty bodies full of blood, amputated limbs, sometimes the whole family, men, women, children, it gets so cold that I cannot see the difference anymore between a piece of meat and a human being. I spent hours and hours of work, nights without sleeping, trying to keep those hearts to continue to beat, but I just don't feel my heart anymore. And I had many problems to sleep at night because I was facing this question. I could not see the difference between humans and pieces of meat. And on my second memory, It was an auditory memory. First thing I hear when I step out of the car, it's the gunfire of a Kalashnikov. I've heard it many times before, but this time was so loud, I thought it was right in my ears. I don't know how far it was, but as a reflex, of course, I ducked down and I got scared. But I can assure you, it was the first and only time that I got scared, because gunfire of Kalashnikov, it's as normal as breathing in Yemen. Almost every Yemeni has a Kalashnikov. And then you start to understand the perspective of chaos and misrule. It's when the abnormal becomes normal. And after that, much lighter, but maybe much more symbolic, when I was about to enter the house, there is this pickup 4x4, this big truck that passes by me at high speed with a big machine gun in the trunk. And driving it, it's a small boy. He can't be more than 11 or 12. He was hardly reaching the pedals. And inside that car, it's full of other kids, like if they were having fun. And I saw like many of these Mad Max type of images during my stay in Yemen that explain the chaos, the anarchy. And I can assure you that it's not bombs and guns that kill most of the people in a war zone, it's chaos. This type of conflict destroys health, security, justice, education, everything that makes humans feel like humans. 100,000 children died in Yemen since the beginning of the war, roughly 5 years ago. And there are 5 million children in risk of dying of famine as we speak. So of course they live like there is no tomorrow, because for many there isn't. And I shouldn't, I can't, and I promise that I won't forget what I've lived and what I've seen. And that's why I'm here today, to tell you that I will always make an effort to explain people that surround me that they should internalize in their thoughts and in their actions that we are allowing human beings in Yemen and in many other places in the world to stop feel like human beings. And what kind of humans are we by allowing this to happen? Besides all the human suffering, there was still something else that surprised me in Yemen. Plastic. Tons of plastic everywhere. Plastic bottles, plastic plates, plastic bags, everything was wrapped in plastic and everything was thrown to the floor. Because it looks like they have some bigger concerns, like surviving. How can we expect them to care about the planet if they have no tomorrow? And this is not just me saying. There are studies that show that 80 to 90% of the plastic that eventually goes to the ocean comes from areas of extreme poverty. How can we expect that these people deal with the perception of the protection of the planet if they don't know when they will get the next meal? So again, the oceans and the atmosphere has no borders. Our heart does, and that is what is destroying this planet. Because to stop this pandemic of plastic without stopping the war that causes extreme poverty, or without stopping extreme poverty, is it possible? I honestly don't think so. And I find it very interesting because if you Google like climate change and poverty, the questions that will pop up is like, how is climate change affecting poverty? And this is a very important question. But it's much more important to ask the question the other way around. How is poverty affecting climate change, affecting the destruction of the planet? How can we change the planet when we have so many people with a different mindset? And I remind you, it's not poverty by itself that causes social unrest and wars. It's inequality, it's unfairness, it's the huge difference between rich and poor that drives people mad. Eastern Congo is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. Green mountains full of water, forests, animals, amazing fruit, beautiful lakes. It's a beautiful area. But it's also the home stage of the worst war that all of you have ever lived if you are not approaching your 80s. Meaning that since the Second World War, it's the war that has killed more people, roughly 6 million, because nobody's really counting in these places in the planet, right? And when I was there, in a Sunday afternoon, they called me to the hospital. It was a 39-year-old woman, and she just gave birth to her 10th child, and she was bleeding a lot. So the decision to stop the bleeding after many procedures was to go to the operation theater right away. And when they call me, I enter the operation room, and I just hear the monitor like beep, 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 beep. The heart rate is so fast that I immediately can feel how severe it is, the hemorrhagic shock. Am I going to save her? I don't know. So the surgeons, they don't have much time to think. They have to stop the bleeding. In this case, they had to remove the uterus. It was what we call uterine atony. It's when the uterus cannot contract anymore, so it bleeds. She had 10 pregnancies, maybe more. And while surgeons are doing their job, I'm just trying to keep her alive. With blood transfusions, with infusions, ventilation, adrenaline infusion. Like in my mind, I have all this science like bumping in my head, all my medical knowledge that I can reach. And at the same time, the fact that she's mother of 10. So the surgeons were pretty fast, they end the surgery, and then it's up to me. I was 28 years old. I was all alone in terms of decision making for this type of skills and knowledge. It was my first mission. So I take my time for the anesthetics to wear off. I'm waiting for her to recover the spontaneously breathing capacity. And with no rush, when I thought the timing was right, I removed the endotracheal tube, because what she needed was the famous ventilators that we all speak about. What she needed was intensive care, but we didn't have. So I have to remove the endotracheal tube. And when I do it, a few seconds after, she develops this severe lung edema, so severe that eventually her heart stops. I mean, immediately, I start chest compressions as hard as I can. And I just have this image of the sweat dropping from my forehead to my hands while I'm looking to her face. And I go on and on and on and on until I'm completely exhausted. I lost her. She died. And then, this was not the first time I saw somebody die, but it was the first time in my life that I had that bitter and very painful feeling that maybe it was my fault. Maybe I could have done something better. Maybe I did something wrong. And then I have to break the news to the oldest daughter. Father is gone. The concept of family in these parts of the world is very different, so no father. I'm going to talk to the oldest daughter. She's 14. She's already taking care of the newborn that will never meet his mother. And I have this image of this scared girl receiving the news that it haunts me until today, and probably it will forever. It's like it's the guilt. Am I to blame? Or should we blame the war? Or should we blame us by pretending that these wars don't exist? Should we blame poverty? Should we blame the lack of education, the lack of family planning? I believe that this woman and our planet have something in common. Both were destroyed due to the lack of family planning. 200 years ago, we reached 1 billion. In 30 years, we will be 10 billions. And then we can discuss if we should eat meat or be vegan, if we should travel by boat, by car, or by plane, if we should use wood or gas or electricity to warm ourselves up. But we are just too many. There's a name for this. It's overpopulation. And it will get worse because the poor, they have the right to wish for the same comforts that we'll have that consume much more energy. How do we deal with this? If we don't find a way of reaching a balance and tackle family planning in the areas, there are still many regions in the world where it's, in average, women have 6 to 7 babies. And of course, these people are the ones that are born without a perception of the future. They will never care for CO2 or plastic. They just care for the next meal. It's up to us to tackle family planning. But family planning always had very bad publicity in every country in the world. Somehow, it's a matter of manhood. Men feel more powerful when they have many children. I remember once when I was in Central African Republic, the nurse that was working with me asked me, "Hey doctor, how many children do you have?" And I said, "None." And then I thought it was polite to ask him back, like, "How many children do you have?" And he says, 21. And I thought, oh, I should be doing something with my life maybe. In many places, it's still like a projection of the working force. And family planning goes against most of the cultures and basically every religion. So politicians are very afraid to tackle this subject because it's very difficult to accept in the common opinion. But if we don't put all our efforts in education, especially for girls, in these type of places where it's a rule to have many children, we will never be able to reach a common ground in terms of the projection of our future. We are trying to save our house, but we don't care about the family that's living in it. It makes no sense. It's illogical and it will not work. This was a problem created by men, by all of us, and the solution, it's also all of us. But I mean all of us, the 8 billion that live right now. So what we need, in my humble opinion, it's a revolution. A peaceful revolution, an emotional evolution towards kindness and empathy. It's all about our heart. I'm just a doctor. I'm specialist in anesthesiology and intensive care. Last 10 years I've been working mainly in intensive care here in Portugal because when I'm going on missions, there is no intensive care. The people that need it just die. In the last 7 months, I've been working a lot. These are my first few days of vacations and only days of vacation since March, with many different patients, including many COVID-19 patients in intensive care. And I would like to dedicate all my efforts, all my work, all my words, while we discuss here about tomorrow, I would like to dedicate the privilege of being here with you to those that have no tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Ai, meu Deus.
Obrigado. Thank you. Obrigado.
Oh, I told you it will be hard because I know this gentleman for quite a while. Gustavo is not fair, but it's reality. The last time I was with Gustavo, I presented this book in Oporto, 1001 Letters to Mosul. We way past our time, so I'm so sorry to the next guests, but I have to tell you this. I thought it could not get worse. That time we talked about with your last book, but it did. Suddenly, all over the world and in Portugal as well.
I don't know about the impact that this will have in terms of the perspective on the long run, but of course we are facing a huge challenge that is taking a step back, and in terms of the humanitarian help, humanitarian aid all over the world, like the World Food Program that was deservedly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, just say that we came back 20 to 30 years in terms of the help of the most needed. So this is definitely a big step back, but I assume that pretty soon we will get back on track, and I'm an optimistic, and I think we are getting better.
Yes. So I'm so sorry we don't have more time, but I assure you, following Gustavo Carona on his social network, mainly on Instagram, is a duty. You have to do it, because every day Gustavo tells us not only these stories, but also gives us a perspective regarding these and other themes. But one way of helping Gustavo and all of his activism, because he says he's only a doctor, but I think he's quite an human rights and dignity activist, is to buy his books. So, O Mundo Precisa Saber, The World Needs to Know, and 1001 Letters to Mossul. They're incredible books. Be ready to read them, not before bedtime. Okay, during daytime it's better. Otherwise, you end up with like Gustavo, not falling asleep very easily, and then you need a bedtime story. And I don't have time for all of you. So, Gustavo, thank you so much for having us, for being here. Thank you so much. I'll be back in 1 minute with the last panel regarding education and social impact. Thank you.
Thank you.